Absolute chaos in the Big 12, and we haven't even gotten to the night slate. This is an emergency Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Saturday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. Gus Malzahn is gone. He will part ways with UCF, leave the Knights after 4 seasons in Orlando, and become the offensive coordinator at Florida State, ESPN reports. And if you look across the Big 12 with our Big 12 title odds, Arizona State. So at the time we're recording, and to peel the curtain back just a bit, in my wonky hotel room, I am showering, putting on my Big 12 hoodie to get, and if you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job, putting on my hoodie to get ready to go to Iowa State and Kansas State, Farmageddon, on site with Locked On Big 12 this evening, when I get the push notification from ESPN that Gus Malzahn is gone, no longer at UCF, will become the OC for Mike Norvell at FSU. And I see the score of Arizona State and Arizona with Cam Scatterboot and company blowing out the Wildcats. Now, first and foremost, foot and mouth, should have called that. Arizona State, a much better football team. Let's talk scenarios here in a second. First, the bigger news, the news that will follow UCF for the next month as they search for a new head coach. Gus Malzahn's done. 9-4 his first season in the American Athletic Conference, 9-5 after that. And then last season, 6-7 in the Big 12, takes his team to a bowl game, loses in the Gasparilla, then 4-8 regression this year. He sells out for KJ Jefferson, the Arkansas kid, and it doesn't work. I had sources a month ago who were calling saying, man, everybody at UCF just wants Gus to save a little face. He could come back next season. There's no intent to actually fire him or move on in that capacity. Things are rocky right now, and he's doing everything he can in the public sphere to try to win back donors, to try to bring himself back into the graces of the UCF fan base. And instead of doing that, he's walking. He is taking the backseat, becoming an offensive coordinator in a job that is this isn't a career saver. This is an attempt to save someone else's. Mike Norvell, the only reason he's coming back to Florida State after going 2-10 this season is because of the promise of new assistant coaches. Gus Malzahn was one of the most innovative offensive minds in college football a decade ago. We were all saying that 2011 Auburn year, that wow, between Cam Newton and Gus Malzahn, those two guys put their brains together, and this is the most deadly offense college football has ever seen. He goes to Arkansas State, has immediate success in the Sun Belt, and then at Auburn goes to the BCS National Championship game in year number 1. Where was that Gus Malzahn in Orlando? Why could a guy like Frost or a Heupel win at such a high level at UCF, and then a Gus walks in who also won in the SEC, who also had success at other major schools, walk in and not? How do you not bring in bigger and better recruits with the base of the Big 12? We're seeing a BYU do that right now. They are getting better recruits because they're in the Big 12. How did Gus Malzahn, who, and I'm an Arkansas native, we revere that guy. I mean, you look back to when he was a high school football coach and say, yeah, that was a dude. Everybody was scared of his Shiloh Christian high school teams. Offensive guru. He had the VHS tapes that everybody wanted to buy. I don't get, it was almost as if he leaves an Auburn, leaves an SEC school, and UCF was never a serious stop for him. From waving off his backup quarterback on the sideline to not having any answers to the Baylor game last year where you're dominating in the fourth quarter and you have a complete collapse. His last 2 years, his first 2 in the Big 12, have been completely erratic. And if I'm a UCF fan, you wanted the legendary coach to work out. You wanted the Herm Edwards type. Oh, we hired a guy who's got a track record, who's coached at a big level, who's been to a national championship game as a head coach. You want that guy to work out, and you're a little stunned when it doesn't. But honestly, you're probably better off for it. Now where you go is someone who has coached in Florida, someone who has Florida ties. Now what you do if you are UCF is go get the guy who knows one of the top states in the entire country when it comes to high school recruits. That's the state of Florida. The hire that should be made by UCF must be a coach that understands not necessarily even the UCF culture, but understands that state and what can be done. If Iowa State or Kansas State takes a ton of in-state kids, only in-state kids, or Oklahoma State takes only in-state kids, they cannot compete. Heck, if Texas Tech only takes West Texas kids, they can't compete. If UCF takes solely Florida products, you could win a Big 12 championship and compete in the college football playoff. That is the mentality the next head coach of UCF needs to have. And I do not think that parting ways with Gus Malzahn, though it sounds like Gus is the one who's leaving, is something that's going to be bad for UCF. I think if you're a UCF fan, given what he did at 28 and 24, 16 and 18 in conference play, that was like he was 16 and 18 in conference play as the head coach of the Knights. And listen to this: 5-3, then 6-2 his first 2 seasons in the AAC. So he had patted himself with an 11-5 conference record, and then past that in the Big 12, he was 5-13. Couldn't win. BYU's proving that teams can adjust and do so. Cincinnati didn't have a god-awful year. UCF was arguably non-competitive in most of its Big 12 games. And now the head coach that did that is gone. I don't think it's a bad thing for the Knights. I don't think you're in a bad spot if you're the Knights. This is just a sporadic, instant reaction, but the next guy, he'll be able to put you in business. Let's talk Big 12 title scenarios at this point. Because what we have seen today, and at the time of recording this, the Arizona State game is not over, but it's over. I was so completely wrong on that front. I thought that Arizona could play a competitive spoiler. I thought Oklahoma State could play a competitive spoiler. And neither of those things happened. I thought, okay, well, the metrics say this. Throw the metrics out the window, buddy. It's the Big 12. I've got to learn my lesson at some point. And now what we've seen today, if we follow the little chart that's posted to Reddit, Colorado wins. That effectively cuts half of the Big 12 championship scenarios in half, or more than that. Baylor beats Kansas. That cuts even more scenarios. Texas Tech beats West Virginia. That cuts even more scenarios. Now we're down to Arizona State beating Arizona. That cuts even more scenarios. So this is where it's going to count on the TCU and Cincinnati game, followed by the Iowa State-Kansas State game and the BYU and Houston game. Here is what is still alive. If TCU beats Cincinnati, Iowa State, Kansas State. Iowa State wins that game. We'll go with the Iowa State scenario here. Iowa State wins that game. BYU beats Houston. It is Arizona State, Iowa State in the Big 12 title. Iowa State wins Farmageddon. Houston beats BYU. It is Colorado, Arizona State. Iowa State could win the game and miss the Big 12 championship. Let's keep it right there. TCU beats Cincinnati. Kansas State wins Farmageddon. We go to BYU and Houston. If Houston wins that game, it's Colorado and Arizona State in the Big 12 championship. We knew that. They would be a couple of 7-2 teams. Well, what about if BYU beats Houston? In the event that Kansas State beats Iowa State, we will get a rematch of BYU and Arizona State. And might I say, at this point, while I would love to see Colorado in the Big 12 title and love to see Colorado represent us in the college football playoff because they have 2 Heisman contenders, seeing BYU and Arizona State square off again would be massive. What if you got a full 4 quarters out of BYU? What if you got a full 4 quarters out of Arizona State? What would that game look like? That's a question that a whole lot of us have. But another thing we've got to consider here, if Arizona State has knocked off Arizona, which I do believe, looking at the scoreboard right now, at the time of recording, is going to be the case. It would take a monumental, insane drop-off from the Arizona State Sun Devils to change that. If the case is that, post-Texas Tech winning, post-Baylor winning, post-Colorado winning, and Cincinnati beats TCU, now we go haywire. Cincinnati, if they beat TCU, we're going to drop down to the Kansas State-Iowa State game. Let's look at scenario number 1. Cincinnati has defeated TCU. Iowa State defeats Kansas State. BYU and Houston, we see a BYU victory. It is Arizona State and Iowa State. A 3-way tie between, making a 4-way tie, I should say, between Iowa State, BYU, Arizona State, and Colorado. We get that coveted. We mentioned it all week. It's 7-2, 4 teams with 7-2. It's going to be Arizona State and Iowa State. If Houston wins that game, it will be Colorado and Iowa State, as BYU's taken out of contention, and Arizona State won its game, but by virtue of Cincinnati beating TCU, followed by Iowa State beating Kansas State, followed by Houston beating BYU. Colorado and Iowa State will meet in Arlington for the Big 12 championship. What, Drake? Why? I don't know. That is the way the tiebreaker shakes out in this conference. Arizona State could win its game and then not go to the Big 12 championship no matter how much they dominate Arizona by. But wait, there is more. Arizona State wins. Cincinnati beats TCU. I've already given you the scenarios where TCU wins. If Cincinnati beats TCU, Kansas State beats Iowa State. Okay? We're going to track over to BYU and Houston now after that game. So Kansas State has beaten Iowa State. If BYU wins their game against Houston, we're right there again. It's Arizona State and BYU. That has become a prevalent thing. If Kansas State beats Iowa State, there's a very good shot BYU's in the Big 12 title. For Houston, if they beat BYU, then you have Kansas State over Iowa State, dropping Iowa State to a 3-loss team. You have Houston over BYU, dropping BYU to a 3-loss team. And that puts Colorado and Arizona State, the only 7-2 squads in the Big 12, in the Big 12 championship. That, again, by virtue of Houston beating BYU and Kansas State beating Iowa State. So if you are a Colorado fan, there are multiple scenarios that could get you here. But a Colorado-Iowa State game is effectively a lock with a Cincinnati, Iowa State, Houston win. We could see Colorado face Arizona State with that Houston win over BYU in a scenario where Iowa State beats Kansas State. And that scenario, again, where Arizona State has beaten Arizona. What you've got to digest here a bit. And this is where it breaks my brain a lot. So I'm trying to explain it to you while I'm explaining it to myself. What breaks my brain and what we got to get to the bottom of here is that Kansas State Iowa State game, as consequential as it is, there's still a lot riding on TCU and Cincinnati. If you're BYU, you are rooting hard for Kansas State at this point. If you are Colorado, you're kind of rooting for a hodgepodge, but the most important domino that can fall for you is Houston beating BYU. It seems like that's the most important, and the second most important here would be a Kansas State win against Iowa State. But like I told you, if TCU beats Cincinnati, Iowa State beats Kansas State, Houston beats BYU, Colorado is in. If Cincinnati beats TCU, Iowa State beats Kansas State, Houston beats BYU, Colorado is in, and they play Iowa State. Then it becomes a conversation of, does Colorado play Arizona State? Does Colorado play Iowa State? And the answer to that is we still don't. There's just a lot. It's like that. But remember the old computers from 2005 where the pipes would crawl on the home screen or whatever it was? That's effectively what this spreadsheet looks like for the options in the Big 12. If I can dumb it down for you, Arizona State, you are pretty much in the Big 12 championship game now that you've won this game. Now that we saw Texas Tech win, you're pretty much in the Big 12 championship game. There's a rogue deal where there's a raw deal for truly if Cincinnati wins against TCU and then Iowa State wins against Kansas State and then Houston wins against BYU, where you get left out for Colorado and Iowa State. But outside of that, you look pretty good to either play BYU or Colorado. Maybe two rogue scenarios where at this point Arizona State is not getting in. For BYU, you need help. For Colorado, you still need some help. For Iowa State, you still need help. The Baylor Bears, it was a valiant, fun ride. Kansas State, a very fun ride. At this point, I do not believe that will be the path that you have put yourselves on, thanks to Arizona State dominating Arizona and getting the job done. That game on the road for the Sun Devils, complete domination. So much so that I was like, yeah, I can record this show. So that's it. Chaos right now. Gus Malzahn is gone at UCF. The future of that program is now in limbo. Who will run it? And then BYU, Arizona State, Colorado, Iowa State, all still in contention of the afternoon. And if it's chalk, it's Arizona State, Iowa State. Tomorrow I'll break it all down. We'll find out who's in Arlington. This has been, it always will be, Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.